Amidst the night's deep shadows, a revelation echoes like a distant sound. The story you're about to uncover is not merely an ancient fantasy, but a mystery shrouded in darkness and secrets. Imagine a time when beings of colossal stature walked the earth, known as the NEPHILIM, the children of gods and men. But who were they truly? How did these giants, who defy logic and history, come into being? For many, this is a forgotten legend, a narrative relegated to the great book of myths. Yet, as we delve into the mists of antiquity, we find fragments suggesting a truth far more complex and intriguing. What lies hidden behind the tales of the 200 fallen angels? What was the fate of these beings, and what impact did they have on human civilization? Human curiosity is like an invisible thread, connecting us to a past yearning to be revealed. Today, we question the conventional narrative and embark on a journey where archaeology and theology intertwine. What exactly do the ancient texts tell us about the Nephilim? And perhaps more importantly, why was this history silenced? Before we immerse ourselves in the narrative, a question hangs in the air, almost a whisper. Were the Nephilim mythological creatures, or is their existence supported by tangible evidence that defies modern understanding? Throughout our journey, we will explore the remnants left by these beings, the inscriptions on ancient artifacts, and the collections that may hold unsettling truths. Keep your mind open and prepare to unveil the mysteries. If you feel compelled to continue the search for answers, please subscribe to our channel, give us a like, because by doing so, you not only support our investigation, but also join a community that values the difficult questions. And in the comments, feel free to share where you're listening from and what you think about the Nephilim. We are all here to discover together. As you settle into this nocturnal journey, I invite you to immerse yourself in an atmosphere of mystery. Imagine being surrounded by a dense ancient forest, the cool, damp air embracing your skin. The distant sound of a running brook and the rustle of leaves create a soft symphony as the moonlight filters through the tree canopies. Here, in this timeless space, past and present intertwine, and you can almost feel the presence of something greater. Let your breath slow and deepen as the day's tension dissipates. Feel the weight of your body settle onto the surface where you are as if you are connecting to the very ground, to the history that resonates beneath you. That connection is vital for the journey ahead. Remember, as we explore the mysteries of the Nephilim, what is at stake is not just curiosity, but the search for truths that may change our understanding of history. The Nephilim, as described in ancient texts, arose in a time of great upheaval. The biblical narrative, specifically in Genesis 6:1-4, mentions the sons of God and the daughters of men. That passage, often interpreted in various ways, suggests an interaction between celestial beings and humanity that resulted in the birth of extraordinary beings. These giants are more than just legends. They represent an intersection point between the divine and the human. The central figure of this narrative is that of the 200 fallen angels, known as the Watchers. These beings who descended from heaven left their celestial dwellings for a reason that echoes through the ages. What could have motivated such entities to depart from their heavenly existence? The story tells of a covenant under a curse, an agreement that may have unleashed unthinkable consequences for both them and humanity. Now, imagine yourself on Mount Hermon, the place where, according to the Book of Enoch, these angels gathered. With its towering mountains and imposing cliffs, this sacred location is shrouded in mystery and reverence. The megalithic ruins that can be glimpsed from its slopes speak of civilizations that, like the Nephilim, may also have left their indelible marks upon the earth. The weight of those ancient structures is almost palpable. Have you reflected on what these angels brought with them? The Book of Enoch lists a series of knowledge they shared with humanity, including metallurgy, astrology, and aqueduct systems. What, at first glance, may seem like a gift can also become a curse. Unbounded knowledge can lead to corruption and decay, as seems to have happened. This narrative of a gift that turns into a burden is a recurring theme in the history of humanity. If you have ever found yourself pondering this dynamic between knowledge and power, you are not alone. The story of the Nephilim is, in many respects, the story of humanity filled with choices and consequences. What kind of society would emerge if such beings truly walked the earth? And what are the moral and ethical implications of their existence? As we begin to unearth the layers of this story, prepare for a journey that not only illuminates the past, but also forces us to confront our own truths and beliefs. As this exploration deepens, remember that what is at stake is more than mere curiosity. It is an invitation to question what we know and what we accept as truth. And as we move forward, keep in mind that the mystery of the Nephilim is just the tip of the iceberg. There is much more to come, secrets waiting to be discovered in the shadows of history. We are just beginning this journey together, and we barely know what lies ahead. If you feel ready to continue this exploration, subscribe to our channel and like this video. Share your thoughts in the comments and join our community of truth seekers. The night is long, and the story of the Nephilim is only just beginning to be revealed. On Mount Hermon, the gentle breeze blows, bringing with it echoes of a distant past. The contours of the mountains wrap an aura of mystery, as if they were guardians of secrets that should never be revealed. Here, on the sacred summit, the story of the Watchers unfolds, where 200 angels, known as the Sons of God, made a decision that would change the course of humanity. They descended in search of something beyond what they could find in their celestial dwellings, and the nature of their choice resonates to this day. It is said that these angels, perhaps dissatisfied with celestial purity, found an irresistible fascination with the daughters of men. The Book of Enoch narrates how, in an act of rebellion against the divine order, they formed a pact determined to teach humanity hidden knowledge. That act of transgression was not only a violation of celestial rules, but also an invitation to chaos and corruption. What could have motivated such elevated beings to venture onto such a path of disgrace? Could it have been a quest for freedom, a desire to experience life in a way they never could in their divine essence? As the fine rain begins to fall, forming small puddles around the base of the mountain, we can imagine the scene of the pact. The angels gathered under the moonlight, whose rays shone brightly, illuminating the determined faces of the Watchers. The atmosphere was charged with tension, a premonition of what was to come. One of the angels, the leader among them, Semyaza, raised his voice proposing the union with the women of the earth. The others, fascinated by the idea, agreed, and thus the line between the divine and the human began to blur. That union resulted in the birth of the Nephilim, beings of incomparable strength and stature. They were not merely giants, they were the personification of a new era, a generation that carried within it both divine and mortal essence. However, that new world generated by the union of the Watchers and the daughters of men did not bring only wonders. The Book of Enoch tells us that corruption and violence began to spread across the earth. The Nephilim, in their greatness, became oppressors, using their power to dominate and subjugate the weaker ones. As the narrative unfolds, we begin to perceive that the story of the Nephilim is not just about colossal beings, but about the consequences of actions that defy the natural and divine order. What followed was a cycle of decay that culminated in the Great Flood, a divine act of purification intended to eradicate the impurity that had spread. But even after the catastrophe, the story does not end. What happened to the Nephilim? What remained of them after the flood? The Book of Enoch mentions that also afterward, the Nephilim continued to emerge, suggesting that their influence was not totally extinguished. Reflecting on these passages, we are led to question what we truly know about the history of humanity. The Nephilim may have been simply a misinterpretation of reality, or perhaps they represent a hidden truth that was carefully erased from collective memory. Archaeology, with its remnants and fragments, invites us to reconsider the way we understand our past. There are inscriptions, artifacts, and stories that speak of encounters between gods and men, of beings who walked among us, and who may have influenced our development. As explorers of this forgotten history, it is essential that we keep an open mind to unconventional possibilities. The excavations at Heliopolis, for example, reveal megalithic structures that defy contemporary logic. The ancient Romans, in building their temple, not only used enormous stones, but also techniques that seem beyond the reach of the engineering of the time. What can be considered a simple construction transforms into a testament that ancient peoples were involved in something much deeper, perhaps a reverence for the beings who once inhabited the earth. And so, as the night advances and the storm intensifies, we are confronted with a dilemma. The story of the Nephilim, the Watchers, and the interactions between the divine and the human are not mere fairy tales. They are an invitation to reflection on the nature of reality, morality, and what it means to be human. The Nephilim, as the children of transgression, represent a mirror for our own choices and their consequences. As we delve deeper into this narrative, the question that resonates is, to what extent are we willing to unravel the mysteries that surround our own existence? In this moment of introspection, I invite you to allow yourself to reflect on these questions. What is truth and what is myth? What is our role in the continuity of this ancestral narrative? As we explore the next layer of this story, prepare to discover evidence that may challenge the way we see the world and ourselves. What you will find may not be just an answer, but a new perspective on what it means to be part of the long tapestry of humanity. If you are still with us on this journey, consider subscribing to our channel. Delve into the mysteries that still remain hidden, and don't forget to leave a like, as that helps others join us in this search. In the comments, share your thoughts on the Nephilim's influence on our history and how these narratives shape your understanding of the past. This space is a haven for those who have the courage to ask and explore the unknown. And so, as the rain continues to fall gently, preparing us for the next phase of our exploration, stay tuned. What is to come may challenge everything you thought you knew about the Nephilim, and the impact they had on human history. In the reverberating silence of Mount Hermon, the rain falls like a soft whisper, as the echoes of the past continue to intertwine with the present. The puddles formed around the base of the mountain reflect not only the moonlight, but also the history of a transgression that resonated through time. The connection between the Watchers and the daughters of men brought forth a new being, the Nephilim, who were not only a mixture of divine and human, but also a symbol of the consequences of a daring and rebellious act. With each passing day, the story of the Nephilim becomes more complex. The accounts in the Book of Enoch offer us a window into understanding what happened after the fall of the Watchers. As corruption spread, a new generation of Nephilim emerged, increasingly powerful and, at the same time, increasingly distant from their divine origin. The strength that once might have been a blessing transformed into a burden, leading to unprecedented decay. As the storm intensifies, a group of explorers heads towards the ruins of Heliopolis, where the gigantic stones remain as silent sentinels of a forgotten past. These explorers are in search of answers, trying to understand how these imposing structures were erected in times when modern technology was still a distant dream. One of the team members, Kale, an archaeologist passionate about ancient mysteries, observes the layers of meticulously carved stone, questioning whether these constructions could have been the work of the Nephilim themselves. Kyle, with his notebook and a flashlight in hand, approaches one of the enormous stones that make up the temple base. He crouches down, examining the marks left by tools that, according to tradition, should not exist. How did these people manage to move these 1,000-ton rocks? He murmurs to himself, while his colleagues take notes and capture images. The marks on the stones seem to tell a story that goes beyond human. Understanding, a story that might very well be linked to the beings who once walked between men and gods. While Kale and his team conduct their research, a brainstorm also forms in his mind. What exactly did the Nephilim bring to humanity? Were they merely mythical figures, or did they represent a truth that was intentionally forgotten? He remembers a passage from the Book of Enoch, where the Watchers are described as having taught men skills like metallurgy and writing, knowledge that could have propelled entire civilizations. But at what cost? In the heat of the discussion, Marin, the expedition leader, raises a question that makes everyone think. What if the Nephilim were not just an anomaly, but the key to understanding the evolution of humanity? What do we truly know about the civilizations that existed before our time? Her words hang in the air, creating a climate of reflection on what is considered truth, and what may be merely a social construct. The uncertainties surrounding the Nephilim intensify when the explorers decide to proceed to the Heliopolis quarry, where it is believed the stones were cut before being transported to the temple. Upon arriving at the site, they are stunned to see blocks even larger than those used in the temple construction. How is this possible? Asked Thara, an archaeology student fascinated by the stories involving ancient peoples. These stones must weigh over 1,000 tons. Kyle approaches a colossal stone, observing the tool marks that seem impossible for the technology of the era. These marks don't fit any known pattern, he reflects, as a chill runs down his spine. If the Nephilim really built this, what else could they have done? The idea that these beings may have possessed abilities beyond human comprehension begins to sow doubt in everyone there. At that moment, a strong gust of wind blows, carrying with it dry leaves and small debris. The explorers look at each other, sensing that the storm is not just a force of nature, but perhaps a symbol of the forces they are about to unleash. What they discover in the coming hours could change not only their understanding of history, but also the very nature of reality. With the darkness of night approaching, Marin decides it is time to set up camp in the vicinity of the quarry. As they settle in, a deep sense of expectation permeates the group. Each of them is aware that the answers they seek may not only reveal the origin of the Nephilim, but also question the very essence of what it means to be human. As the fire crackles, stories and theories are exchanged among the group members. Kale speaks about the tales of giants in various cultures around the world, from biblical stories to Nordic legends. The Nephilim may have been a manifestation of a phenomenon that occurred in various parts of the world, each culture dealing with it in its own way, he suggests, igniting a spark of curiosity in his colleague's eyes. In the stillness of the night, under a starry sky, the explorers cannot help but feel that they are on the verge of a monumental discovery. Every conversation, every theory, every discovery made amid these ancient ruins brings them closer to a deeper understanding of the Nephilim and their implications for humanity. The search for knowledge is not just an intellectual journey, it is an exploration of the very nature of existence, where what might have been a simple act of rebellion transforms into a global mystery that transcends time. What lies ahead is uncertain, but the courage to question and explore is what defines the true human essence. And so, under the moonlight and the whisper of the night breeze, the explorers prepare to face what awaits them, eager to pull back the curtains of the past and discover the secrets the Nephilim left behind. In the heart of the Heliopolis quarry, the atmosphere is dense and tense. The explorers move cautiously among the huge rocks whose irregular contours seem to whisper ancient secrets. Cale stands out, his curiosity strongly pulsating, as he touches the surface of a stone that seems to have been left behind, as if it were waiting for someone who understood its history. "This stone, Marin," he says, looking at the expedition leader, "is not just a block of granite. It is a testament to a time when human skill and perhaps something more came together." Marin approaches, her eyes shining with the excitement of discovery. "Do you truly believe the Nephilim were involved in the construction of this place?" Her voice is soft, but the intensity of her question resonates in the air. Cale hesitates for a moment, thinking about the implications of his words. If they really existed and brought advanced knowledge with them, that would change everything we know about ancient history. The group disperses, each member immersed in their own thoughts and investigations. Thara, intrigued by the peculiarly intricate marks on the stones, observes a fine line that seems not to fit any known pattern of the time. "These marks, they're unusual," she murmurs almost to herself. A chill runs down her back, as if the stone were alive and telling its own story. As the explorers continue investigating, a distant rumble resonates in the mountains, making everyone turn towards the dark clouds gathering overhead. The sky seems to be closing in, and the storm that was once a light rain now transforms into a warning sign. "We should prepare to head back," Marin suggests, but Cale is absorbed in his notes, ignoring the growing tension. Suddenly, a cry cuts the air. It is Thara, who moved away from the group, heading towards an opening in the rocks. "Come, you need to see this." The urgency in her voice brings everyone back to reality. Cale, Marin, and the others run in her direction, their hearts beating faster with the expectation of something extraordinary. Upon arriving, they find a small cavern partially covered by sediment. Inside, a series of inscriptions carved into a stone wall capture everyone's attention. This is an ancient language," Cale observes, running his fingers over the complex shapes. "It looks like a type of hieroglyph, but it doesn't resemble anything I've seen." "These symbols may be a direct link to the Nephilim," Marin ponders, her gaze fixed on the wall. "If they truly taught humanity, perhaps these inscriptions explain what they learned." The team moves even closer, adrenaline pulsing through their veins as they try to decipher what is before them. The inscriptions seem to tell a story of forbidden knowledge, of skills that were transmitted, metallurgy, astronomical wisdom, and, most importantly, the manipulation of matter. "This is the knowledge the Watchers brought," Cale concludes, his voice filled with reverence. "But what happened in exchange? What kind of price did humanity pay for this knowledge?" The storm begins to roar above them, and heavy raindrops start to fall, echoing the growing turmoil inside Cale. The somber atmosphere of the cavern contrasts with the outside world, where lightning illuminates the sky, revealing the grandeur of the mountains surrounding them. "We need to document this," Marin orders, as everyone rushes to record the inscriptions before the rain turns the place into a mud hole. While Cale writes frantically, a new idea comes to his mind. What if we can connect these teachings with other ancient civilizations? What is known about the Sumerians and the Egyptians? They may have been influenced by the Nephilim. He stands up, his eyes shining with new determination. "We are not just here to understand Heliopolis. We are on the trail of a legacy that may have changed the course of history." Marin agrees, her expression resolute. "We need to partner with linguists and experts in ancient cultures. This could be a monumental discovery." But before they can discuss further, a tremor runs through the ground, making everyone look at each other, alarmed. "What was that?" Thara asks, her voice trembling. The distant echo of rocks shifting is followed by a new rumble, closer this time. "It seems the storm is affecting the structure," Cale says, the adrenaline surging even higher. "We must leave now." As they rush towards the cavern exit, the rain begins to fall with more intensity, the waters quickly forming small streams descending the stones. The group advances urgently, but something inside Cale makes him hesitate. He briefly turns back toward the interior of the cavern, feeling that the inscriptions are calling him, as if the ancient Watchers were still there, waiting to reveal what they had hidden for so long. But reality pulls them back, and they exit the cavern, only to be greeted by a storm that seems to have taken on a life of its own. Lightning cuts through the sky, and the sound of the rain transforms into a deafening roar. "We need to take shelter," Marin shouts as they search for a nearby refuge. As soon as they enter a small improvised shelter in the Heliopolis ruins, the adrenaline still races through their veins. Kyle takes a deep breath, trying to process everything they discovered. "The truth is closer than we imagined," he murmurs. "The Nephilim are not just a legend, they were a crucial part of our history." While the storm continues its furious dance outside, Kale senses that his search for answers has only just begun. And, in the back of his mind, a new question arises, more unsettling than all the others. What will be the next step humanity will have to take upon discovering the truth about its past? The atmosphere in the Heliopolis cavern was charged with anticipation, each of the explorers absorbing the gravity of what had been discovered. The inscriptions on the wall seemed to dance under the flashlight's beam, revealing a world of long-hidden secrets. Kale, still stunned by what he saw, stepped back a little, allowing his colleagues to examine the marks. He needed a moment to process the implications of those enigmatic figures. If these inscriptions truly document the Nephilim's teachings, we could be looking at the key to understanding not only their history, but also that of all human civilization, Thara said, the passion in her voice evident. She crouched down to study one of the figures, which seemed to represent a humanoid being with features that defy logic, such as disproportionate limbs and a luminous aura. "Look at this. It's as if they are trying to show something beyond what humanity is capable of." Marin, for her part, began recording everything on her tablet. "We need a specialist in ancient linguistics. We cannot afford to interpret this hastily," she warned, her focus on details that might be lost in the heat of the moment. "Each symbol tells a part of the story, and we must respect its meaning." Kyle, still reflecting on the connection between those inscriptions and the other civilizations they had studied, approached. Again, what if these teachings influenced other cultures? The Egyptians, for example, had access to advanced knowledge of astronomy and architecture. Could it be that these ideas didn't come from somewhere beyond Earth? His mind was in a whirl. The possibility of a network of knowledge that transcended epochs and places was electrifying. "Are you suggesting that the Nephilim may have been a link between different civilizations?" Marin asked, her eyes lighting up at the idea. "That would change everything. It would mean that the history we know is just a fraction of what truly happened." The storm outside was beginning to intensify, the raindrops transforming into a genuine downpour. The noise of the water hitting the rocks echoed in the cavern, creating a soundtrack that seemed to amplify the tension of the moment. Kale felt a chill at the thought of what might happen if that storm changed the dynamic of the place. They needed to do what they could before nature decided it was time to carry away the secrets they were revealing. "We need to take these records to the surface and analyze them more carefully. If we are truly dealing with information that can redefine our understanding of history, we cannot risk losing it," Kale affirmed, his voice charged with urgency. "Let's divide up and try to capture the maximum information before the cavern becomes impassable." The team agreed, and the pressure increased on each of them. Thara and Marin dedicated themselves to writing and photographing the inscriptions, while Kale and Em moved away, searching for more revelations in the depths of the cavern. Each step they took seemed to bring them closer to an unknown destination, an abyss of knowledge that could contain both their hopes and their anxieties. While exploring, Kale came across a side opening, partially hidden by a curtain of rocks. The flashlight's beam illuminated a wider space, where additional inscriptions adorned the walls. What else had been forgotten there? He approached, his eyes wide with the possibility of more discoveries. The symbols were different from the previous ones, more complex and intertwined, creating a pattern that seemed almost like a dance. Kale's heart quickened. "Em, come here. You need to see this," he called, gesturing for his friend to approach. Em hesitated, but soon joined Kale, his eyes widening at the sight of the new discovery. This is incredible. These symbols seem to relate to constellations," he said, running his hand over the surface as if wanting to feel the energy emanating from the stone. "But there's also something alarming about it. Look at these strokes. They seem to describe a warning story." "A warning?" Kale questioned, his mind racing. "About what?" "About the Watchers. About the Nephilim. What they brought to humanity and the price we paid. This seems like a caution that knowledge may not only be a blessing, but also a curse," Em replied, his tone grave. Kale felt a chill as he considered his friend's words. He knew that the line between knowledge and destruction was thin. If this is what they wanted to teach us, then why does no one talk about it? Why don't ancient texts mention what really happened? The storm was roaring outside, and as the two friends continued examining the inscriptions, a sense of foreboding began to grow in Kale. It was as if the stones were trying to alert them about something that was about to happen. He looked at Em, who seemed equally apprehensive. We need to go back. We shouldn't be here much longer. At that instant, a rumble resonated through the cavern, and the walls seemed to shake. The flashlight's beam began to flicker, and a sound like a deep lament reverberated through the rocks, as if the caverns themselves were stirring in response to the storm outside. "Quickly, we have to get out," Cale shouted as he headed back to where the others were. The adrenaline was high, and the feeling that something monumental was about to be revealed intensified with every step. As they descended, confusing and unsettling thoughts passed through Cale's mind. What did the Nephilim truly bring? What secrets were hidden there? And more importantly, what price would humanity have to pay to acquire that knowledge? The answer was becoming increasingly urgent, and he knew he could not ignore the clues they had found. What awaited them beyond that storm? Cale and Em approached the new opening, their eyes fixed on the complex symbols adorning the walls. The atmosphere seemed to vibrate with an unknown energy, a force that drew them closer. "Look at this, Em," Cale murmured, his voice low, almost reverent. "These symbols seem to tell a completely different story from the one we found earlier." Em leaned in, observing every nuance. "It looks like a type of language I've never seen before. It's as if there is a visual narrative happening here." Em's words echoed in the cavern walls, mingling with the sound of the rain that was now falling in torrents outside. The flashlight's beam revealed not just drawings, but a kind of pattern that repeated itself, like an ancestral mantra. Meanwhile, Thara and Merrin continued recording the inscriptions in the main cavern. Thara's excitement was palpable as she tried to decipher the meaning behind the shapes. These beings, the Nephilim, they were more than just giants. They were, in some way, intermediaries between the gods and men, she said, her voice full of enthusiasm. "If we can understand this, we can discover not only who they were, but what they truly wanted." Merrin, who was immersed in her tablet, looked up at Thara. "But what if these records are just part of a larger story? What if there is something more that we are not seeing?" She turned towards the side cavern where Cale and Em were. "We need to go over there and see what they discovered." The pressure from the storm was mounting, the sound of the water resonating like a distant drum as they ventured into the new opening. Cale looked at Em, his eyes shining with the possibility of new discoveries. These symbols, they seemed to connect with the idea of lost knowledge, a wisdom that was somehow concealed. He pointed to a set of figures that seemed to represent a creation scene where winged beings intertwined with humans. "This may be a record of how the Nephilim influenced humanity. If it's true, this could change everything we know about history," Emmy replied, his tone charged with gravity. "But it could also put us in danger. These secrets were buried for a reason." He hesitated, looking around, as if expecting the rocks to reveal more than just their rough surface. Meanwhile, the rain outside intensified, and thunder resonated in the mountains, making the cavern vibrate as if it were responding to something primordial. The group gathered around Cale and Em, with Merrin bringing her flashlight closer to illuminate the new discovery. "What did you find?" Thara asked, curiosity evident in her voice. Cale gestured towards the symbols. "It seems this speaks about a pact, something that was made between the winged beings and humanity. They were not just gods, but also guides, mentors, perhaps even prisoners of their own creation." Merrin, with her knowledge of linguistics, began to analyze the symbols. "If this is true, what does it mean for us? What remains of that legacy? And more importantly, who still remembers those pacts?" She looked at the others, her eyes shining with a mixture of excitement and concern. "We need to be careful. What we are about to discover may not just be a matter of history, but also of power." "You're right," Cale agreed, feeling a chill. "If someone knows we are here, we could be putting our lives at risk, but we can't simply ignore this. The answers may be here, and we need to find them before the storm prevents us." The team prepared to document the discoveries, but before they could do more, a deafening rumble resonated through the cavern and the lights began to flicker. The ground shook beneath their feet as if the cavern itself were stirring, and a piece of rock broke off the ceiling, falling near them. "Watch out!" Thara shouted, pulling Merrin out of the path of the slide. "We have to get out of here now!" Em exclaimed, his voice tight with fear. "If the storm continues, we could get trapped." Kyle looked one last time at the symbols, wishing he could capture the knowledge they represented before being forced to leave the cavern. "We need more time," he said, his mind catching a final glimpse of what could be. But reality took hold as the noise of the water intensified, and the walls began to close in on them. "Let's go!" Kyle shouted again, and they rushed towards the exit, their hearts pounding in their chests. However, even in their haste, the image of the dancing symbols and the idea of a lost legacy remained with them, a flame burning in the darkness. Upon exiting the cavern, the storm roared fiercely, as if the sky itself were lamenting the loss of ancient secrets. The group gathered, breathless and wet, but buoyed by the possibility of what they had found. "We need to come back here," Cale affirmed, determined. "These records are just the beginning. There is something bigger at stake, and we need to unveil it." "But how?" Marin asked, concern etched on her face. "If the cavern is so unstable, how can we ensure we'll have another chance?" "We need a plan," Thara replied, "and allies. We can't do this alone. There are others who may also be interested in this knowledge. We need to find who can help us." Cale nodded, the determination growing within him. "And we will. No matter the cost. The Nephilim were not just a legend. They were part of something much bigger, and we are about to discover what really happened to them." With this decision, they prepared to face the future, with the storm behind them and the promise of new discoveries ahead. Cale moved away a little, his eyes fixed on the symbols that now danced in his mind, a mixture of meanings and possibilities. The vibrations in the cavern seemed to intensify, as if the echoes of the ancient Nephilim were awakening, responding to the presence of the explorers. "What's next for us, then?" Em asked, his voice cutting the heavy silence that surrounded them. "If these records truly speak about a pact, what does that imply for the Nephilim and for humanity?" "We need to decipher what these symbols truly mean," Cale responded, his mind boiling with questions. "If the Nephilim were, in fact, intermediaries between gods and humans, what does that mean for our history? And how do these pacts intertwine with what we know?" The atmosphere in the cavern was charged with expectation, and everyone present seemed to feel the urgency of an imminent revelation. Thara, in a burst of curiosity, approached the wall even closer, her flashlight illuminating a symbol that seemed to stand out from the others. "Look at this," she called, the excitement in her voice making the others draw near. "That symbol, it looks like a kind of portal." "A portal?" Marin repeated, intrigued. "Do you believe this can represent a passage between worlds? Between humans and the divine?" "It's possible," Thara nodded, gesturing towards the other symbols around it. "If these beings truly descended and influenced our civilization, perhaps this is a representation of that act. An invitation or a warning." As they discussed fervently, a new rumble resonated through the cavern, the ground shaking beneath their feet. The light of the flashlights flickered again, and the feeling that something was about to happen became almost unbearable. "We need to work fast," Cale said, his voice firm. "The storm outside is worsening, and we don't know what else might happen in here." The group organized themselves, each one focused on recording the symbols and their interpretations. Marin, with her tablet, began taking notes quickly, while Cale and Em tried to understand the relationship between the drawings and the history of the Nephilim. "Look at these strokes," Em said, pointing to a set of lines that intertwined. "It seems like they are telling a creation story, as if the Nephilim were molding something or someone. This could mean they had an active role in the formation of civilization," Cale pondered, "but we need to investigate more deeply. What else might be hidden here? If they were truly guided by a greater purpose, who or what was behind that purpose?" As the group continued to unveil the visual narrative, the sound of the rain outside began to flow like a furious river. The incessant drumming on the cavern stones resonated like an alarm, an ancestral call that seemed to interlink the present with the distant past of the Nephilim. Suddenly, a new symbol caught Marin's attention. "This one here," she began, her voice hesitant, "is different. It doesn't look like a simple representation." Everyone turned towards the flashlight that illuminated a complex drawing, with twisted lines forming what appeared to be a hybrid figure, part human, part winged, with eyes that seemed to shine even in the gloom. Is this a representation of a Nephilim?" Thara asked, almost in disbelief. "But what does that mean?" "It means they were more than mere legendary figures," Cale responded, the intensity in his gaze growing. "They were beings of power, possibly with abilities beyond our comprehension. If this is true, perhaps these records are telling us that there is still much we don't know about our own history." The pressure in the cavern increased, and the group felt the need to decipher every symbol, every line, every blank space that might contain a vital clue. "If the Nephilim were among us, they may have left a mark that has not yet been discovered," Marin began to consider aloud. "What if that lost knowledge is the key to understanding our own nature and history?" "We need to be cautious," Em warned, his expression grave. "If there are others who seek that knowledge, we cannot underestimate the danger we run. This place is not just a place of discovery. It is a sacred site that can attract unwanted attention." And as if Em's words had invoked some force, a new rumble reverberated through the cavern, and the flashlight beams began to flicker violently. "What is happening?" Thara shouted as the ground shook once more, almost as if the cavern itself were protesting against their presence. Let's get out of here, Kyle ordered, his voice firm, but the adrenaline in their bodies prevented them from moving quickly. They were aware that time was running out, and the storm outside was not the only thing threatening them. With one last look at the symbols that could change the course of their lives and the history of humanity, the group began to move towards the exit. The cavern, now filled with echoes of their conversations and nervous laughter, seemed to vibrate with a growing discontent, as if it were trying to preserve what they had discovered. We'll come back when the storm passes, Kale suggested, his mind still boiling with possibilities. We need to understand all this before we risk anything more. And so, with the feeling that they had touched on something monumental, yet undefined, they advanced toward the darkness of the tunnel, the rain beating on the rocks around them like a warning about the secrets they were about to discover. The echoes of the storm outside seemed to dance in harmony with the growing tension inside the cavern, as if the environment itself were in tune with the revelation hanging in the air. Kale and the others approached the ornate wall even closer, each symbol now pulsating with new life, as if waiting to be deciphered. If these drawings truly represent a pact, what else can they tell us? Kale murmured, his mind buzzing with possibilities. Marin, with her tablet, began recording every detail, methodically capturing the symbols. This is fascinating, she commented, as her fingers quickly slid across the screen. These are not just drawings. They seem to tell a visual story. Each line appears to indicate a movement, an action. What if those movements are more than just representation? Em questioned, looking at Kale. What if they are instructions or warnings for those who dare to approach what lies beyond this place? The idea seemed to float in the air, like an invitation to delve deeper into the mysteries surrounding the NEPHILIM. Thara, still absorbed in a symbol that glowed under the flashlight's light, lifted her head. Look at this, her voice resonated, cutting the tension of the moment. Here, among these symbols, there seems to be a repetitive sequence. This could indicate a ritual or procedure, but for what? Perhaps an invocation, Kale suggested, his gaze intensifying. If the Nephilim truly had the ability to cross dimensions or worlds, these symbols may be the key to understanding how they did it. The idea that they might be facing a portal, not just physical but metaphorical, began to gain traction. A new rumble resonated through the cavern, making everyone look towards the ceiling, as if expecting the rock itself to open. What else might be hidden here? Marin asked, her voice tense. If these symbols truly speak of passages, who or what else might have passed through this place? The questions hung in the air, but were soon interrupted by a new sound, a faint hum that seemed to emanate from the rock itself. Kale approached the wall, placing his hand on one of the most prominent symbols. This isn't just a mark. It's as if it's vibrating, responding to our presence. He looked at the others, his eyes shining with excitement. If we could activate it somehow? Thara approached, her eyes fixed on the symbol. What if that vibration is a form of communication? A message from whoever was here before? Em nodded. We need to experiment. Maybe the answer lies in how we interact with this. The group, now united in a single objective, began to explore the possibility of activating the symbols, their hands moving over the marks in search of a connection. Let's try something, Kyle proposed, his voice determined. If we touch the symbols in a specific pattern, similar to what we see here, maybe we can trigger something. Marin, always pragmatic, raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting we should play with forces we don't understand? That's risky. Kyle smiled, a glint of defiance in his eyes. Risky, yes, but perhaps it's the only way to discover what really happened here. We can't turn back now, we are too close. With a reluctant nod, Marin agreed. The group organized themselves, their hands moving in unison, touching the symbols in a sequence that seemed logical to them. The humming increased, resonating through the cavern and the flashlight. Beams began to flicker as if responding to the rising energy. Suddenly, a glow of light emerged from the wall, flooding the space with a golden, warm light. Everyone stepped back, their eyes wide, as the symbol vibrated intensely. What is happening? Thara exclaimed, her voice full of astonishment. Kyle advanced again, his curiosity overcoming his fear. Just a little more, he said, extending his hand towards the light. Whatever was unfolding seemed beyond comprehension, but also deeply familiar, as if a part of them was recognizing something ancestral. The glow intensified, and the cavern walls began to pulse with images. The symbols started to move, forming scenes of winged beings descending from the sky, of men and women uniting with them. The vision was mesmerizing, and a reverent silence fell over the group. They are dancing, as if they are celebrating something, Em whispered, totally absorbed in the vision. This is a representation of the pact, of the union between the Nephilim and humanity. Yes, Kale agreed, his eyes fixed on the light. But it also seems like a warning. Something is about to happen, something that has already happened. What does that mean for us? As the light spread, a new tension began to emerge, as if the cavern itself were alive, responding to every movement. The group felt that the atmosphere around them was changing, becoming heavier, more charged with meaning. "We need to stop this," Mirren said, her voice firm, but her gaze was fixed on the dance of the symbols. "If we continue, we may awaken something we cannot control." Kyle hesitated, but the urgency in Mirren's tone convinced him. "True, but we need to record what we saw. This is just the beginning, and we need to document everything so we can understand better. Whatever happened here was not in vain." The group quickly began recording the images and symbols, their hands moving frantically as the humming and the light continued to pulse, but a sense that they were about to cross an invisible line hovered in the air. The storm outside roared, and the cavern responded with its own storm of revelations. Finally, when the last symbols were recorded, the light began to diminish. The group, still dazed by the experience, gathered in a circle, their faces illuminated by the dim light of the flashlights. "What do we do now?" Em asked, his voice a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "We need to get out of here and discuss what we learned," Cale responded, his gaze determined. "These records are an invitation to explore our history, but also an alarm. We cannot ignore what we discovered." A new determination seized the group. They were about to touch something much deeper than they imagined, and now, more than ever, they needed to unite their forces and knowledge to decipher what it truly meant to be part of the history of the Nephilim. Whatever lay beyond that cavern, they were ready to discover it. The pulsating golden light from the wall seemed to envelop the group in an embrace of warmth and energy. Cale, determined, extended his hand and touched the central symbol once more, feeling an intense vibration that reverberated through his fingers. "It's as if it's alive," he whispered, almost in a trance. The others drew closer, the tension in the air palpable. Marin, always cautious, observed Cale's reaction. "We need to be careful. That light, it may be a manifestation of something we don't understand." However, her voice was tinged with curiosity. She also felt the call of the wall, a call that resonated in her mind. Thara, in a mixture of nervousness and excitement, asked, "What if that light is the key? What will happen if we continue? We could be on the verge of unveiling a secret the Nephilim guarded for millennia." Everyone's gaze was fixed on Cale, awaiting his response. "We are going to explore this together," he declared, his voice firm. "If we are here, it is to understand what happened in this place. If there is a risk, we must face it. What more can we discover if we don't try?" He began to move his fingers in a pattern that recalled the sequence of the symbols, inviting the others to join him. Marin hesitated for a moment, but Cale's determination was contagious. She positioned herself beside him, following the movement of his fingers over the pulsating surface. "Then let's go, but if something goes wrong, we need to have an exit plan." The group organized themselves, each one, positioning around the central symbol, forming a circle. Cale began to murmur words that seemed to resonate from the depths of his mind, incoherent phrases that somehow felt right for the moment. If these symbols are an invocation, perhaps the right words can activate them? He felt the energy around him intensifying, a sensation that mixed fear and anticipation. As they concentrated, the light from the wall became more intense, almost blinding. Thara, staring intently, noticed that some of the symbols began to move incrementally, as if they were reordering themselves under their hands. "Look," she shouted, "they're transforming. What does this mean?" The group fell silent, observing the transformation. Then, as the light shone more intensely, they perceived that the symbols were not just changing, but also began to create images, outlines of figures that seemed to dance on the surface of the stone. The shapes were familiar and, at the same time, alien, gigantic figures that seemed to mix human characteristics with traits of mythical creatures. "Are these images of the Nephilim?" Em whispered, with a mixture of fascination and horror. "What are we truly witnessing?" Cale stared intently at the images, trying to decipher what they might mean. "If this is a record of who they were, perhaps we can understand not only what happened here, but what they truly were. The Nephilim were not just creatures, but part of a larger narrative." The cavern began to vibrate, and a wave of energy enveloped them, making the light seem almost palpable. Marin, on an impulse, tried to capture the image on her tablet, but the screen began to fail, flickering in confusion, unable to process the intensity of what they were experiencing. "It's beyond what technology can handle," she murmured, frustrated. "We don't need technology," Thara said, her voice low but charged with emotion. "We need to connect with this, feel the essence of what we are seeing." Kyle, sensing that the energy was at its peak, began to guide the group in a small dance around the symbol, touching the walls around it, trying to tune into the vibration. Follow the rhythm. Connect with what is here, he instructed, his voice firm but full of emotion. And so, as the golden light expanded, the central symbol began to glow with an almost dazzling intensity. The figures on the walls became sharper, revealing scenes of action, giants fighting, building, and in moments of deep contemplation. They seemed to transmit a message, a legacy of power and destruction that somehow had been forgotten by time. It's as if they are trying to tell us their story, Cale said, focusing on an image that showed a Nephilim in a battle stance, but with a sad look. As if there's a deep pain in that greatness. Or a warning, Marin added, her expression turning grave. Perhaps what they did was not just an act of creation, but also one of destruction. They didn't just come, they brought consequences. The group, now completely immersed in the experience, felt the cavern tremble even more. The humming had become a roar, and the light was almost unbearable. "We need to stop. This may be more than we can handle," Thora shouted, but the connection was already made and the energy seemed uncontrollable. Cale hesitated, but in an act of determination he yelled, "No! We need to understand. If they are trying to communicate, we cannot give up now." He extended his hand, as if trying to touch the images on the wall. Then, with a final flash, everything fell silent. The light flickered, and suddenly the cavern plunged into a dense darkness, as if a cloth had been thrown over the scene. The four were paralyzed, breathing heavily, trying to understand what had just happened. "What was that?" Marin asked, her voice trembling. Cale looked around, still sensing the energy of the connection, now quieter, but still palpable. "I don't know, but I feel like we barely scratched the surface. Whatever the Nephilim wanted to show us, it is still out there, waiting for us to discover." Thara, trying to recover from the shock, finally spoke. "We need to explore more. If there is a message, we need to find it before it's too late." With that renewed determination, the group began to move again, now not just as explorers, but as seekers of forgotten truths, ready to unveil the mysteries the Nephilim left behind. The journey was far from over, and the answers were closer than ever. The intensity of the pulsating light seemed to intensify, almost as if it were responding to Cale's touch. The images on the walls, once mere silhouettes, began to gain definition, revealing not only figures of the Nephilim, but scenes that seemed to tell a story. "Look, they are interacting!" Thara exclaimed, her eyes shining with the discovery. The dancing figures showed the Nephilim in interaction with humans, but they were not just encounters. There was something deeper, a bond that defied comprehension. Cale, now totally immersed in the experience, began to decipher the images. "These are not just records of who they were, but also of how they related to us, humans," he said, his voice choked with emotion. The figures twisted and turned, creating a mosaic of moments that seemed to capture the essence of coexistence, both beautiful and tragic. "If this is true, if they really were here and influenced us, what does that mean for us today?" Marin, by his side, typed frantically on him, the tablet trying to capture the essence of what was happening. "I can't keep up. The images change so quickly. It's as if history itself is alive, unfolding before us." The frustration in her voice was evident, but there was also a spark of hope. Perhaps, if we can understand this narrative, we can discover what really happened to the Nephilim and what was lost over time. Meanwhile, the vibration in the cavern was transforming into an almost deafening hum. The ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse in tune with the light, as if the space itself were aware of their presence. "We are touching something ancient, something that should remain buried," Thara said, her voice almost a whisper. "But at the same time, I feel it is something that needs to be revealed. What we are seeing may be the key to understanding not only the past, but also the future." Cale looked at the images, a mixture of fascination and concern in his gaze. If these Nephilim really interacted with humanity, what else did they share? What secrets did they leave us, and what should we fear or expect? The idea that these beings were not just mythological figures, but parts of a living history, began to take shape in his mind. Suddenly, one image stood out from the others, a colossal figure that seemed to be at odds with the rest. "What is this?" Cale asked, pointing to the figure that emanated an aura of authority and power. It stood out not only because of its grandeur, but also because of the way it seemed to be separated from the rest of the scene, as if it were observing instead of participating. "Perhaps it's a leader, one of the Watchers," Marin suggested, her voice clear and precise. "But why does he seem to be out of sync with the others? It's as if he's warning about something." The group watched in silence, the tension mounting as they tried to decipher the meaning of that presence. "If this is a representation of an event, perhaps it's a warning. Thara suggested, her gaze fixed on the figure. What happened that made that watcher distance himself from the others? There is a message here that we need to understand. The idea that the images might contain warnings or lessons about the interaction between the Nephilim and human beings left everyone intrigued. Kyle, sensing the urgency of the situation, began to dance again around the central symbol, guiding the others to join him. We need to connect with this. Every move we make may be helping to unlock something that is hidden in this place. He didn't know exactly how, but he felt that the key to unveiling the secrets lay in their tuning with the light and the images dancing on the walls. As they danced, the figures on the walls began to move more freely, as if responding to their gestures. A wave of energy swept through their cavern, making the light around them become even more intense. "Look!" Thara shouted, her voice filled with emotion. The figures are joining together, forming a single movement. It's as if we are accessing a collective memory. Kale, now more confident, felt a connection with the energy that enveloped them. If these figures are joining together, perhaps it is representing a moment of harmony between the Nephilim and humans, a time when there was no separation, but collaboration. The idea that the Nephilim could have been allies rather than mere divine beings began to shape his vision of history. Then, a new image emerged, a scene that portrayed a great construction, similar to a pyramid, rising majestically under a starry sky. Heliopolis, Marin murmured, recognizing the structure. This is not just a representation, it is a testament to their connection with the earth and humanity. Kale felt a chill. If this is true, what was lost over time? What stories were erased? With the energy pulsing inside him, they continued dancing and moving in sync, the light from the wall now almost deafening. The images began to spin in a spiral, forming a vortex of light and sound that enveloped them. "We are about to discover something incredible," Kyle shouted, adrenaline rushing through his veins. But as the vortex intensified, a sense of despair began to invade the group. "We need to stop," Marin exclaimed, her voice cutting through the wave of energy. "If we continue like this, we could lose control." Kyle hesitated, but the intensity of the light and the call of the images were irresistible. "We can't stop now. We're so close." But in an instant, the humming transformed into a deafening scream and the cavern began to shake. With one last movement, Kale touched the wall, and in a dazzling flash, everything went out. A profound silence enveloped the group, and they found themselves immersed in total darkness. The light that had been pulsing now had dissipated, leaving only the echo of their breaths and the trembling of the ground beneath them. "Kyle?" Thara's voice sounded weak in the darkness. "What happened?" Silence was the only answer. But in the depths of their minds, a new understanding began to emerge. They were on the verge of unveiling the deepest mysteries of the Nephilim, but now they found themselves on a threshold between light and darkness, awaiting the next revelation that could change everything. The dance of the lights on the cavern walls now seemed like an ancestral dialogue, a call that reverberated through time. Kyle, with his eyes fixed on the colossal figure that stood out, felt that the atmosphere around him was charged with hidden meanings. He didn't know exactly what that presence represented, but a profound sense that there was something more behind that image was beginning to take hold of his mind. "Just a leader?" he questioned aloud, addressing the group. "Or a manifestation of something we cannot fully comprehend?" Thara, still absorbed in the dancing images, turned to Kale. "If that watcher is truly warning about something, what could it be? A warning about the future or a reflection of the past?" Fear and curiosity intertwined in her voice, while Marin continued typing, his hands moving quickly on the screen, as if trying to capture the essence of what they saw in words. "Perhaps it is an account of an event that humans should not have witnessed," Marin suggested, frantic. "Or a warning about the very nature of the Nephilim, the consequences of their actions." He paused, reflecting. If they truly existed and related to us, what else did they leave behind? What secrets still remain hidden? The light's pulsation seemed to intensify, as if it were reacting to the growing tension between them. Kyle rotated again around the central symbol, feeling that the dance was more than a physical movement. It was a way to connect with what was concealed. "We need to do this with more intention," he murmured, sensing the almost tangible energy around him. "Every step, every movement must be an invocation for them to reveal what they need us to know." With new movements, the group began to dance in unison, immersed in that vibration. As they moved, the images on the walls seemed to respond, forming new scenes and narratives, a cycle of light and darkness, of creation and destruction, of human and Nephilim interactions. The history unfolded in a tapestry of events that defied logic and reason. "Look!" Thar exclaimed, pointing to a new scene that was forming. "That seems to be a ceremony, a kind of celebration between humans and Nephilim." The dancing figures now exhibited not only the interaction, but also rituals, as if both groups were united in a common purpose. What does this mean? Were they in harmony? Or perhaps a trap? Marin interjected, his tone cautious. If they shared knowledge, what else could they have offered, and at what cost? The idea that this interaction might not have been as benevolent as it seemed hovered in the air, enveloping the group in a cloak of uncertainty. As they continued dancing, Kale perceived that the figures on the walls were now approaching a somber scene. Nephilim in conflict, humans in desperation, a scenario of chaos and destruction. This is not the celebration we thought, Kale said, his voice trembling. It's a warning. They became a threat, not only to themselves, but to humanity. And now, what should we do with this information? Thara questioned, the anxiety in her tone growing. Should we continue seeking answers here, or should we try to alert the world about what we are discovering? The colossal figure, which before seemed distant, now cast a shadow over the group. It was as if he were observing their reactions, absorbing their emotions, and deliberating on what should happen next. If he is a watcher, perhaps the answer lies in how we, as humans, deal with that legacy, Kel pondered. We need to understand what truly happened so we can shape a different future. Marin stopped typing for a moment and looked directly at Kale. But how are we going? To do that? We don't have any concrete proof, just these images and stories. We need more than that to convince anyone. The energy in the cavern began to change again, the pulsating light diminishing and intensifying erratically. The figures on the walls began to dissolve, as if they were retreating, leaving the space with a sense of urgency. We are losing something important, Kale said, his voice now imbued with determination. We need to discover what this colossal figure is trying to tell us. This may be the last chance we have to understand the true nature of what happened and what was left to us. Let's focus on his presence, Thara suggested. If he is here, maybe we can connect with that energy. We need to channel that. The idea made everyone join again, forming a circle around the central symbol, their hands intertwined. Kyle felt the collective strength of his friends, a feeling of unity that encouraged him to go beyond his limits. With their hands joined, Kyle began to dance again, moving with a clear intention. The light began to shine more intensely, almost dazzlingly, and the images started to spin once more. He allowed himself to immerse in the energy, each movement stronger and more determined as the others joined him, as if they were awakening an ancestral force. "We are here. Show us what we need to see," he shouted, his voice resonating in the cavern walls. And then, as if time itself had stopped, the colossal figure stood out once more, its eyes fixed on Kale, and a powerful wave of energy swept through the environment, making everyone feel light and at the same time immersed in a profound knowledge. The images on the walls changed, revealing a path, a future that was at stake. "This is it," Kyle exclaimed, feeling the connection deepen. "They are not just warning us, they are giving us a chance to change our trajectory." The Watcher's presence seemed stronger than ever, and the cavern pulsed with a new energy. Kale felt that the truth about the Nephilim, their interactions and consequences, was about to be revealed, not as a burden, but as a legacy that could still be transformed. As the lights danced around him, Kale perceived that his journey was about to culminate in a revelation that would not only change the way they saw the past, but also shape the future of humanity. The story of the Nephilim was not just a chronicle of downfall, but an opportunity for ascension, and he was determined to seize that knowledge and share it with the world, no matter the cost. The pulsating light on the cavern walls now seemed like an echo of a forgotten time, as if the Nephilim themselves were whispering secrets in a lost language. Kale, immersed in the visions, began to feel that the environment was responding to his emotions, as if every beat of his heart resonated in the rocks. He turned to Thara, their faces illuminated by the golden light dancing around them. What if these beings not only existed, but are still present in some form? What would that mean for us, for humanity? Thara, with wide eyes, seemed to absorb every word. "Are you saying they could be watching? That perhaps their past actions still have repercussions in the present?" The idea astonished her, but also ignited a spark of determination within her. "We need to discover more. Perhaps these images are a call for us to understand our own history." Marin, still typing frantically, looked at the two. If this is true, then the consequences of what happened between humans and the Nephilim were not limited to the past. We could be living in an era of new interaction, a new relationship that can be both beneficial and catastrophic. He paused for a moment, allowing the gravity of his words to settle upon the group. Kyle, with his mind boiling, walked a little closer to the wall, where the images now seemed to glow with a new intensity. He touched the rock again, feeling the vibration emanating from it. "We need to Understand what these figures are trying to show us. Is there any pattern, any message we haven't deciphered yet? He began to observe more closely, following the shapes that intertwined in a dance of light. As the group focused on the images, a new scene began to emerge. It was a portrait of conflict, of chaos and desperation that before had been submerged in the more cheerful visions. The Nephilim, now portrayed in a fierce struggle, engaged in battles against an army of humans who seemed desperate. This changes everything, Kale said, his voice trembling. The Nephilim were not only figures of wisdom and power, they also had a dark side. Athara, now closer to the scene, shook her head in agreement. Perhaps the interaction we imagined to be harmonious had turned into a struggle for survival. What they brought to humanity may have been a blessing and a curse at the same time. The tension in the cavern increased, and the energy of the images pulsed as if alive. We need to know what happened here, Marin insisted. These stories are like echoes reverberating through time. We need to find the connection between what we are seeing and the history we know. He began recording the new images on the tablet, trying to capture every detail that could be crucial to understanding what was unfolding. Kale felt the growing pressure inside him, an urgency not only to understand but also to act. If these events are repeating themselves, if the Nephilim are still influencing our lives in some way, then we must be prepared. What can we do to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past? The colossal figure on the wall, which before seemed harmless, now transformed into a menacing entity, a shadow cast over the group. It was as if he were observing each of their reactions, measuring their understanding and their determination. Perhaps he is a guardian, Thara suggested, not only of knowledge, but also of warning. His presence may mean that we are closer than we imagine to a new confrontation or a new revelation. As they reflected on that, Kale perceived that the light's pulsation began to change tone. It was as if the cavern were preparing to reveal something even deeper, something that could alter the trajectory of their lives. "What more can you show us?" he asked aloud, addressing the figure that seemed to be alive before them. Immediately, the images began to reorganize, forming a new pattern. Now, a series of symbols began to emerge around the central symbol that Kale had touched. They were inscriptions, letters that seemed unknown, but carried an unsettling familiarity. "Look, this is a language," Marin exclaimed, his voice filled with both excitement and fear. The three approached, observing the dance of lights that now illuminated the inscriptions. Kyle felt a connection with each symbol, as if a part of him already knew those shapes. If we can understand that language, we can decipher what really happened between the Nephilim and humans. This can give us the answers we need, he said. A new determination seized the group. They united, forming a circle around the illuminated wall, and together began to chant words of power that resonated in harmony with the light's pulsation. The cavern seemed to respond, vibrating in unison with their voices. It was a call to action, an invitation for the secrets of the past to be revealed. As the energy increased, Kale felt a wave of warmth engulf him. It was as if the cavern itself were alive, a pulsating organism that wished to share its wisdom. He knew that, regardless of what they were about to discover, that moment was the prelude to a new era, an era where the knowledge of the Nephilim would no longer be a secret hidden in the shadows, but a truth to be shared, and perhaps a path to the redemption of humanity. The journey was just beginning, and with each new revelation, they were one step closer to understanding not only what the Nephilim represented, but how their actions molded the world they lived in. "We are ready to discover," Kale declared, his voice firm. "Let's unveil the mystery together and ensure that their history does not repeat itself." The cavern began to vibrate, and the golden light that had been dancing on the walls now became a mesmerizing spectacle, as if it were molding itself in response to the group's emotions. Kale felt a deep connection with what was happening, as if the Nephilim themselves were communicating something vital. He took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. If they really are watching us, then what is our role in this narrative? Why were we chosen to witness this? Thara, absorbing the magnitude of the experience, replied, "Maybe it's not just a matter of being observed. What if we are here to understand, to learn from the mistakes of the past?" Her gaze fixed on the colossal image that pulsed with an almost palpable intensity. These figures, these beings, they may be alerting us about something that is yet to come. Marin, who continued recording every detail, lifted his head, his eyes shining with excitement. If the interaction between the Nephilim and humans was marked by conflict, what can we do to change that destiny? We are here at a crucial moment where the past and present intertwine. We need to discover what these images truly mean. The light in the cavern began to change again, now revealing a new scene that left the group in silence. It was a representation of an ancient ritual where the Nephilim were surrounded by humans in a circle. Kyle felt a chill when he perceived that the humans seemed to be offering something to the giants. "What is this?" he murmured, pointing to the figures on the walls. "Are they making a pact? Or an exchange?" Thara suggested, her voice tense. "Humans offering themselves in exchange for knowledge, power, or perhaps protection." Marin's expression brightened with that possibility, but was soon replaced by doubt. But if this is true, we need to ask ourselves, what kind of protection did they offer? And at what cost? Kale began to move closer, the light now revealing details that were previously hidden. The expressions on the faces of the humans were a mix of fear and adoration, an unsettling combination. "This looks like a ritual of submission," Kale said, his heart beating faster. "Humans weren't just seeking knowledge, they were giving themselves over to these beings. What does that mean for us? Are we repeating that dynamic?" "Perhaps that is the key to our understanding," Marin suggested, as he continued recording the images. "If the story of the Nephilim is repeating itself, we need to find a way to prevent humanity from becoming a hostage again." The light's pulsation intensified, and the cavern seemed to respond to their words. It was as if the rock itself were vibrating with a message. Kale touched the wall again, feeling the energy flow through him. "What more do you have to tell us?" he asked aloud, almost pleading. "We are ready to listen." In that instant, the light became dazzling, and a new vision began to form. It was a battle, a scene of chaos and destruction, where the Nephilim fought against an army of humans who seemed determined to resist. Kale felt the terror and pain of the battle reverberating in his heart. This is not just an ancient story, it's a warning," he said, his voice trembling. "The Nephilim were not only beings of grandeur, they also had a dark side." Thara and Marin's expressions turned grave. "If that battle is a reflection of what may happen again, we need to act," Thara affirmed, her voice firm. "We cannot let history repeat itself. We need to find a way to prevent conflict." Kale looked at the image of the battle, where the shadows of the Nephilim seemed to devour the light of hope. "But how? What power do we humans have to change that course?" The question hung in the air, heavy and full of uncertainties. The light began to oscillate again, as if it were responding to Kale's doubt. The images began to fade slowly, and the cavern echoed a deep sound, almost like a lament. "Perhaps the answer lies in how we view ourselves," Marin suggested, his mind boiling with possibilities. "If we allow fear to control us, we will be condemned to repeat the mistakes of the past. We need to reclaim what is ours, vindicate our place in history." Kale nodded, feeling that every word resonated with a profound truth. "Then we must prepare, not only to understand but to act. We need to create a new narrative where humans are not just spectators but protagonists." Thara smiled, a gleam of hope in her eyes. "What if this cavern, this place, is a portal for that? A sacred space where we can rewrite what is to come?" Kale looked at the walls, now crackling with energy and light. "We will discover it together. What more do you have to teach us?" he asked again, his voice resonating in the cavern. Sensing the energy around him increase, he perceived that they were on the verge of a new revelation, something that could change not only their understanding of the Nephilim, but also the future of humanity. The walls of the cavern began to shine intensely, as if a new dimension were about to open before them. Kyle, Thara, and Marin joined together, prepared to immerse themselves deeper into the history that awaited to be revealed. What they were about to discover was not just a part of the past, but the key to a future that could finally free them from the echoes of a distant age. "We are ready," Kale said, the determination in his voice resonating through the cavern as the light completely enveloped them. The light in the cavern pulsed with an almost supernatural intensity, as if it were alive and conscious of the emotions that permeated the group. Kale, Thara, and Marin were immersed in the atmosphere charged with anticipation, each one struggling to understand what the visions meant. The image of the battle still burned in their minds, but now a new sequence began to form on the cavern walls. With a gentle movement, the light transformed, revealing a different scene. This time, it was not a battle, but an assembly, where figures of majestic appearance, the Nephilim themselves, were gathered in a circle. Kyle felt his heart quicken. "What does this mean?" he whispered as the details of the figures began to manifest more clearly. "They seem to be discussing something important," Thara observed, her voice almost a whisper. "The expression on their faces is one of fear and deliberate concern." Marin, always attentive, began recording every detail. If they were meeting, this may indicate that there were divisions among them. Just like us, even the Nephilim may have faced internal dilemmas. He looked at Kale, trying to connect the pieces. "What do you think motivated them? Power? Wisdom?" or an internal struggle over what it truly meant to be such powerful beings? Cale reflected for a moment. Perhaps they realized that their existence was tied to the destiny of humans. If they were the progenitors of the Nephilim, then their decisions directly affected humanity. The fear may have arisen from the awareness of what had happened in the past and what could still happen. The light in the cavern began to oscillate again, and new symbols emerged, intertwining with the images that were already there. Kyle felt a chill when he perceived that the new symbols represented not only the Nephilim, but also a series of human figures, each with expressions of expectation and apprehension. It was as if the humans were seeking something from them, something that could change their destiny. "We are seeing a pattern," Thara said, her eyes shining with the revelation. "The story is not just about the Nephilim themselves, but about their relationship with humanity. What we are witnessing here may be a cycle of dependence and resistance. But we still need to understand what really happened," Mirren added, his gaze fixed on the images. "If the last vision was a battle, the one we are watching now may be the preparation for an outcome that can be repeated. What did the Nephilim decide? And what does that mean for us?" Kyle, immersed in the discussion, felt a wave of determination grow within him. If they were facing a choice, and we are going through similar situations, maybe we have the chance to do something different. If we can learn from what the Nephilim faced, we can prevent history from repeating itself. The light in the cavern, responding to the intensity of the conversation, began to pulse even faster. It was as if it were feeding off the group's energy, amplifying their emotions and thoughts. The connection between them and the ancient entities seemed to be strengthening, as if a cosmic bond were being formed. "But how can we act?" Thara questioned, a mixture of hope and skepticism in her voice. "What can we do to change the course of history?" "We need to understand the root of the problem," Cale replied. "If the pact between the Nephilim and humans involved the exchange of something fundamental, we need to discover what was offered and at what cost. What did they want in exchange for power and knowledge? And what do we want now?" At that moment, a new glow took over the cavern, revealing a scene of transformation. The Nephilim were now in a ritual, but this time, instead of adoration, there was an atmosphere of union. They seemed to be using their abilities to create something new, something that could benefit both humans and the divine beings. "Look," Mirren exclaimed, "they are doing something together. This is not just an exchange of power, it seems like a joint construction. They are creating a space for collaboration, not just domination." The vision enveloped them, and Cale perceived that the light was becoming increasingly intense. The images began to move, and the group was transported again, this time to an open field, illuminated by bright stars. It was as if they were now witnessing what could be a new beginning, a space where humans and the Nephilim could coexist in harmony. This is the future we can choose," Cale murmured, excited. "If they could find a path to collaboration, maybe we can too, but we need to act. We need to unite, not just as individuals, but as a society." "Exactly," Thara agreed, with passion burning in her eyes. "If the story of the Nephilim repeats itself, then we also have the power to shape a new legacy, one that is not based on fear or submission, but on understanding and partnership." The light in the cavern now seemed like a beacon, illuminating the path forward. The connection they felt was not just an echo of the past, but a call for the future. Kyle turned to Thara and Mirren, and in a moment of mutual understanding, they knew they were ready to act, ready to become the bearers of that new narrative. "We are ready," Cale affirmed, his voice firm. "We are going to take this message to the world. We cannot let history repeat itself. We need to be the agents of change." With that determination, the light in the cavern began to calm down, but the energy that had been generated between them remained. They were aware that what they had witnessed was not just a passage through an ancient chapter of history, but an opportunity to rewrite the future, a future where the echoes of the Nephilim would no longer be seen as a warning, but as a lesson that could be overcome. As the cavern once again became a space of silence, Cale, Thara, and Mirren prepared to leave that sacred place, carrying with them not only the weight of the past, but also the hope of a shared future, where humanity and its legends could coexist in harmony and understanding. They were ready for the journey that awaited them, a path that could finally lead to the answer to the great question, how can we change our destiny?